The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that my peaceful life in Greenville, South Carolina, was about to get complicated. My name is Henry Thompson, and I had spent the last 3 months building what I considered to be a perfectly reasonable workshop on my 2-acre property. I am a custom furniture maker, and working out of my cramped garage had become impossible after landing several large contracts. The workshop was a modest 1,200 square foot building, positioned well back from the road and barely visible from any neighboring properties. I had done everything by the book, obtained all necessary permits from Greenville County, hired licensed contractors for the electrical and plumbing work, and even exceeded the building codes in several areas. But apparently, none of that mattered to Patricia Zimmerman, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I tore open the envelope and read the letter twice, my blood pressure rising with each word. The HOA was demanding I immediately cease all activities in my illegal structure and appear before the board within 7 days to explain why I had violated covenant restrictions on outbuildings. The letter threatened daily fines of $500 if I did not comply, potentially leading to a lien on my property. I stood in my driveway, staring at the workshop I had poured my savings and sweat into. The building was beautiful, with cedar siding that matched my house, energy-efficient windows, and a standing seam metal roof that would last 50 years. I had positioned it behind a natural tree line, preserving the aesthetics of the property while creating a functional workspace. The idea that this could somehow be illegal made no sense. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to make a call. My neighbor, Robert Chen, answered on the second ring. "You get a letter from the HOA?" I asked without preamble. "No, why would I? What is going on, Henry?" "They are saying my workshop is illegal. I need to look at my closing documents. When I bought this place 3 years ago, did you have any issues with the HOA?" Robert was quiet for a moment. "I have been here 8 years. The HOA was pretty inactive until about 2 years ago when Patricia Zimmerman moved in and got herself elected president. Since then, it has been one thing after another. Last year, she tried to fine the Hendersons for painting their front door navy blue instead of the approved forest green. Did they pay it? No, they fought it and won. Turns out the covenant never specified door colors and Patricia had just made that up, but it cost them about $3,000 in legal fees. My stomach dropped. So she just makes up rules, sometimes. Other times she interprets the existing rules in the most restrictive way possible. You really need to read your covenants carefully. After hanging up with Robert, I spent the next 2 hours digging through my home purchase documents until I found the HOA covenant declaration. It was a 40-page document written in dense legal language, originally drafted in 1987 when Meadowbrook Estates was first developed. I made coffee and started reading. The section on outbuildings was maddeningly vague. It stated that any structure other than the primary residence required architectural review and approval from the board, and that such structures must be consistent with the aesthetic character of the neighborhood and not exceed reasonable dimensions for auxiliary purposes. There were no specific size limits, no clear definitions, and no mention of workshops specifically. I had never submitted my plans to the HOA for approval because the county permit office had never mentioned it, and frankly, I had not thought about it. The HOA had been so quiet during my first 3 years in the neighborhood that I had almost forgotten it existed. No newsletters, no meetings, no communications of any kind until Patricia Zimmerman took over. The workshop had been completed for 2 weeks. I had been working in it for the last 10 days, and it had transformed my business. I could now handle multiple projects simultaneously, had proper dust collection, and finally had room for the larger equipment I needed. Several pieces were in progress, including a custom dining table for a client in Charleston and a bedroom set heading to Asheville. Wednesday morning, I called a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, whose name I found through a quick internet search. His paralegal scheduled me for Thursday afternoon, which meant I would meet with him before the HOA meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, I decided to do some investigating. I drove through Meadowbrook Estates, really looking at the properties for the first time in months. The neighborhood consisted of about 60 homes on lots ranging from 1 to 3 acres. Most were built in the 90s, with a few newer constructions from the last decade. And as I drove, I started noticing outbuildings everywhere. The Martinez family on Oak Ridge Lane had a large shed, easily 800 square feet. The Johnsons on Maple Drive had what looked like a guest house or pool house. 3 properties had detached garages. One home even had what appeared to be a barn, though I suspected it was for show rather than function. I took photos of everything with my phone, noting addresses. When I arrived at Marcus Webb's office on Thursday, I brought printouts of the photos, my HOA covenant, my county building permits, and the threatening letter. Marcus was a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Okay," he said when I finished. "First question, did you know about the architectural review requirement before you built?" "No." "I mean, I read the covenants when I bought the house, but that was 3 years ago. I did not think about it when I started this project. The county permit process was so thorough that I assumed I was covering all my bases. That is a common misconception. County permits address building codes and safety. HOA covenants address private agreements between property owners. They are separate systems." My heart sank. "So I am in violation." "Technically, yes. You should have submitted plans for review. However, that does not mean the HOA can force you to remove the structure or fine you excessively. North Carolina law actually—" "Wait, you said Greenville, South Carolina, correct?" "Yes. South Carolina law provides homeowners with protections against arbitrary HOA enforcement. The fact that they have allowed other similar structures without objection is important. Those photos you took are valuable evidence of selective enforcement. So what do I do? First, you are going to that board meeting on Tuesday. You will be polite but firm. You will acknowledge that you should have submitted plans, but argue that the structure clearly meets the spirit of the covenant language. It is well built, aesthetically appropriate, and no larger than several other approved outbuildings in the neighborhood. Second, I am going to write a response letter that establishes your position and puts them on notice that any fines will be contested. Will they back down? Marcus leaned back in his chair. Honestly, probably not immediately. People like Patricia Zimmerman, they get into these HOA positions because they like control and authority. She will see this as a challenge, but we have a strong case, and most importantly, pursuing aggressive action against you will cost the HOA money. The board has a fiduciary duty to the membership. Spending thousands in legal fees over a well-built workshop that harms no one is hard to justify. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $3,000. If it goes to actual litigation, more. But I think we can resolve this before that point. I wrote the check, though it hurt. That was money I had planned to use for a new planer. Over the weekend, I did more research. I found the HOA's website, which had not been updated in over a year. There was no clear process for architectural review outlined anywhere. I also discovered that the HOA had only 5 board members. Patricia Zimmerman as president, a vice president named Donald Hughes, a treasurer named Sharon Lopez, and 2 at-large members whose names were listed but had no other information. I reached out to Robert Chen again and asked what he knew about these people. "Donald is okay," Robert said. "He is retired military, follows rules, but he is reasonable. Sharon is an accountant, very by the book. The other 2, I barely know them. They never come to meetings." Honestly, I think Patricia just has her friends in those positions. You know where Patricia works, what her background is. She does not work. Her husband is some kind of executive with BMW. They have money and she has free time, which is a dangerous combination in an HOA president. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly. The meeting was held at the Meadowbrook Clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that housed a pool and tennis courts. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder containing my building permits, photos of other structures, and notes I had prepared with Marcus's help. Patricia Zimmerman was already there, arranging papers at a folding table at the front of the room. She was probably 50, with blonde hair styled in that particular way that required weekly salon visits, and she wore a business suit despite this being a volunteer position in a residential neighborhood. "Henry Thompson?" she asked as I entered. "That is me. Please sit. We will address your issue after we complete regular business." About 20 other residents filtered in over the next 10 minutes. I recognized a few faces, but did not know most of them personally. The meeting started with Patricia reading minutes from the previous meeting, then a financial report from Sharon about pool maintenance costs and landscaping contracts for the common areas. Then Patricia cleared her throat. "Now we come to new business. Specifically, the illegal structure erected by Henry Thompson at 847 Sycamore Court." "It is not illegal," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I have all the proper county permits." "Mr. Thompson, you have violated Section 7.3 of the Meadowbrook Estates Covenant by constructing an outbuilding without architectural review and board approval. This is a clear violation, and we have no choice but to pursue enforcement." I stood up, holding my folder. I acknowledge that I should have submitted plans to the board. That was an oversight on my part. However, the structure is completely consistent with the neighborhood character and is actually smaller than several other outbuildings that exist in Meadowbrook. I pulled out my photos and passed them around. Several residents leaned in to look. Patricia's face reddened. "Those structures were approved through the proper process." "Really?" "Because I checked, and the HOA website does not have any record of architectural reviews for any of these properties. In fact, it does not even explain what the review process is." Donald Hughes, the vice president, spoke up. "Patricia, is that true? Do we have approval records for those other buildings?" "That is not the point," Patricia snapped. "The point is that Mr. Thompson has violated the covenant." "But if we approved similar structures," Sharon said carefully, "then we cannot really say his is inappropriate, can we?" "The process matters," Patricia insisted. "Rules mean nothing if we do not enforce them." An older man in the back raised his hand. "I am Tom Fletcher. I have lived here since 1994. That shed on the Martinez property. That has been there since at least 2002, maybe earlier. I do not remember anyone ever asking the HOA about it. The Johnsons built that pool house about 5 years ago," another woman added. "I do not remember a review process for that either." Patricia was losing control of the room. "We are getting off track. Mr. Thompson, you have 2 choices. Submit an application for architectural review, which the board will consider at next month's meeting or face daily fines starting immediately. I will submit an application, I said, but I want to be clear. I will not stop using my workshop and I will contest any fines. I have consulted with an attorney, and we believe any attempt to fine me while similar structures exist without penalty constitutes selective enforcement. Are you threatening this board? I am informing you of my position. The meeting deteriorated from there. Patricia tried to move on to other business, but several residents wanted to keep discussing the issue. Donald finally suggested they table the enforcement action until after reviewing my application, which Patricia reluctantly agreed to. As people filed out, a few stopped to talk to me. Tom Fletcher shook my hand. That workshop looks great, by the way. My son drives past your place. You do good work. Thank you. Patricia has been itching to make an example of someone. She tried to fine me last year for having my trash cans visible from the street on a Thursday. Pickup is Friday morning. Where exactly does she think trash cans go? I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. The board seemed divided and public opinion was on my side. The next morning, I received an email from Patricia with the architectural review application. It was 6 pages long and required detailed drawings, material specifications, a site plan, and an application fee of $500. The email noted that incomplete applications would not be considered, and that the review process could take up to 60 days. I called Marcus immediately. Is this normal? I asked after reading him the requirements. For a structure that is already built? No, she is making this as difficult as possible, but here is the thing. You should have submitted something before building, so we have to play ball to some extent. However, 60 days is unreasonable. The covenant says the board must respond to architectural requests within 30 days. What if they just reject it? Then we sue. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Put together the best application you can. I will review it before you submit. Make it impossible for them to say no on any legitimate grounds. Over the next week, I worked with the architect who had drawn up the original workshop plans to create the detailed package Patricia wanted. I included photos of the completed structure, copies of all my permits, a survey showing the building's location, and a written statement explaining that the workshop was for my furniture-making business, which was properly licensed with the county. The application packet ended up being 40 pages. I delivered it personally to Patricia's house the following Monday, getting her signature on a receipt. The board will review this at next month's meeting, she said coldly at her doorstep. The covenant requires a response within 30 days. The board meets monthly. Next meeting is in 5 weeks. Then perhaps the board should have a special meeting to address time-sensitive issues. She closed the door without responding. I documented everything, emailing Marcus copies of the application and receipt. 3 days later, I received a violation notice in my mailbox. It was from Patricia personally, not on official HOA letterhead. The notice stated that I was in violation of Section 9.2 regarding business activity on residential property, and that my furniture workshop constituted a commercial operation prohibited by the covenants. This was a new angle. I immediately read Section 9.2, which stated that properties could not be used for commercial purposes that generated regular customer traffic, employees, or signage inconsistent with residential use. I did not have customers coming to my property. All my furniture was delivered via a cargo van I owned. I had no employees. I had no signage. I worked alone in my workshop, creating custom furniture that I then delivered to clients. Marcus was blunt when I called him. She is grasping at straws. A home-based business is legal under South Carolina law as long as it does not create a nuisance. Your operation clearly does not. But this tells me Patricia is not going to back down. She has decided you are her enemy. What do I do? We wait for the board to respond to your architectural application. If they approve it, this all goes away. If they deny it, or if they fail to respond within the 30-day window, we file suit. In the meantime, document everything. If she sends notices, keep them. If she shows up at your property, record the conversation if possible. The next few weeks were tense. I continued working in my workshop, completing the projects I had committed to. The dining table for the Charleston client turned out beautifully, and I delivered it personally, getting a glowing review and a promise of referrals. But every day, I worried about finding another threatening letter. 28 days after submitting my application, I had heard nothing from the HOA board. On day 31, I sent a certified letter to Patricia and all board members noting that the deadline had passed and requesting an immediate response. 2 days later, Patricia called me directly. "Mr. Thompson, the board has reviewed your application, and we are denying it. The structure is too large, too close to the property line, and your business use violates our covenants." I had been prepared for this. The structure is smaller than the Martinez shed and the Johnson pool house. It is 75 feet from the nearest property line, which exceeds county requirements, and I do not operate a business in violation of the covenants. The board's decision is final. You have 30 days to remove the structure or face daily fines of $500. I will be filing a lawsuit. You should inform the board. You do what you need to do, Mr. Thompson. She hung up. Marcus filed the lawsuit the next day in Greenville County Court. We sued the HOA for arbitrary and capricious enforcement, selective application of rules, and violation of South Carolina statutes regarding HOA governance. We sought a declaratory judgment that my workshop was compliant with the covenants, and an injunction preventing the HOA from fining me. The lawsuit was served on the HOA within days. Patricia, as president, received the notice first. What happened next surprised everyone. Donald Hughes called me 3 days after the lawsuit was filed. "Henry, this is Donald Hughes, Vice President of the Meadowbrook HOA Board. I want to talk to you off the record if possible. I need to tell my attorney about any communications. That is fine, but I want you to know that the board vote was not unanimous. Sharon and I both voted to approve your application. Patricia and the 2 at-large members voted to deny. It was 3-2. Why are you telling me this? Because I think Patricia has lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do. We are supposed to maintain property values and ensure the neighborhood stays nice. Your workshop does not hurt property values. It is well built and barely visible. This lawsuit is going to cost the HOA $20,000 or $30,000 in legal fees, maybe more. That is money coming from everyone's dues. I do not want to cost the neighborhood money, but I am not tearing down my workshop. I understand. I am going to call for a special board meeting to reconsider. I cannot promise anything, but I wanted you to know not everyone is against you." I reported the conversation to Marcus, who was encouraged but cautious. Until there is an official action, we proceed with the lawsuit. The special board meeting happened 2 weeks later. This time, nearly 40 residents showed up, far more than the usual attendance. Word had spread about the lawsuit and the legal fees it would incur. Patricia opened the meeting looking tense. "We have called this special meeting to reconsider the board's decision regarding the Thompson structure." Donald immediately spoke up. "I move that we reverse the denial and approve Henry Thompson's architectural application." His workshop meets the spirit of our covenants, and pursuing this lawsuit is not in the financial interest of the HOA. Second, Sharon said immediately. Patricia looked like she had bitten into something sour. Discussion. One of the at-large members, a woman named Brenda, said, "I think we need to enforce our rules. If we let this slide, everyone will just do whatever they want." Tom Fletcher stood up from the audience. "Brenda, people have been doing whatever they want for years, and it has been fine. Half the outbuildings in this neighborhood were never formally approved. We are a community, not a dictatorship." Several people applauded. Another resident, a younger man I did not recognize, added, "I moved here because it was not one of those HOAs that micromanages everything. If we start acting like that, property values will actually go down because people will not want to live here." The discussion went on for 20 minutes. It became clear that sentiment was strongly against Patricia. Finally, she called for a vote. Donald and Sharon voted yes. The two at-large members voted no. Patricia had the deciding vote. The room was silent as everyone waited. "I vote no," Patricia said firmly. "The application is denied." The room erupted. People were shouting, some at Patricia, others at each other. Donald looked disgusted. Sharon shook her head. Finally, Donald called out over the noise, "Then I move for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Zimmerman as board president." This was apparently unusual because even Patricia looked surprised. "That is not on the agenda." "I do not care," Donald said. "You are making decisions based on personal pride instead of what is best for the community. Someone needs to say it. You cannot vote to remove me without cause." Sharon pulled out a printed document. "Actually, according to our bylaws, any board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the full board for actions detrimental to the HOA. I would argue that forcing an unnecessary lawsuit qualifies." "This is ridiculous," Patricia said, but her voice wavered. The vote happened quickly. Donald and Sharon voted yes. The two at-large members initially voted no, but then Brenda changed her vote after a whispered conversation with the other member, 3-2. Patricia was removed as president. She stood up, face red with anger and humiliation. "You are all making a huge mistake. This HOA is going to fall apart without proper leadership. Or maybe it will actually start working for the residents instead of against them," Donald said quietly. Patricia grabbed her papers and left. About a dozen residents followed her out, apparently her supporters. Donald became acting president immediately. His first motion was to approve my architectural application. It passed 4-0 with Brenda abstaining. After the meeting, Donald approached me. "I am sorry you had to go through this. We will send a formal letter approving your workshop within the week. I hope you will consider dropping the lawsuit. I will talk to my attorney, but yes, if we can resolve this, I would prefer that. And Henry, if you ever want to join the board, we could use someone with common sense." I declined politely, but appreciated the sentiment. Marcus filed a dismissal of the lawsuit once I received the official approval letter. The HOA agreed to reimburse me for $3,000 in legal fees, which was less than I had spent but more than I had expected to get back. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months passed peacefully. I worked in my workshop without incident, my business grew, and Meadowbrook Estates settled into a quiet routine under Donald's leadership. He sent out a monthly newsletter, organized a neighborhood cleanup day, and generally ran things efficiently and without drama. Then, on a Saturday morning in late August, I was in my workshop working on a custom bookcase when I heard an engine outside. Looking through the window, I saw a county code enforcement truck parked in my driveway. An inspector got out, clipboard in hand, and approached my workshop door. I opened it before he could knock. "Can I help you?" I am Inspector Davies with Greenville County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about this structure. I need to verify permits and conduct an inspection. Of course. I have all my permits. Let me grab them from the house. I retrieved my permit file and returned. Inspector Davies examined the documents carefully, then walked around the workshop, checking various elements. He spent considerable time examining the electrical panel and the foundation. Finally, he made some notes and looked at me. Everything appears to be in order. Your permits are valid and the structure was built to code. Who filed the complaint? I do not know. Do you have that information? He checked his clipboard. Anonymous call. That is pretty common, unfortunately. Often neighbor disputes. After he left, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who had called. But I had no proof. The next week, I received a notice from the South Carolina Department of Revenue. They were auditing my business for sales tax compliance. This was strange because my furniture business was properly registered, and I filed all my taxes quarterly without issue. The auditor who contacted me was professional but thorough. She requested 3 years of records, which took me days to compile. In the end, she found nothing wrong, but it cost me time and stress. A week after that, I came home to find a certified letter from my homeowner's insurance company. They had received information that I was operating a commercial woodworking business on my property and needed to verify that I had proper commercial liability coverage. I did have commercial insurance for my business, but sorting this out required multiple phone calls and documentation. The pattern was clear. Someone was systematically trying to make my life difficult. I called Robert Chen. Have you seen Patricia around lately? She has not been at any HOA events. Why? I explained the series of complaints and investigations. That sounds like her, Robert said. She is vindictive. After the Hendersons won their door color fight, their trash cans disappeared twice, and someone called animal control claiming they had a vicious dog. They do not even have a dog. Did they report it to police? They could not prove anything, same as you cannot now. He was right, but I was tired of being harassed. I decided to be proactive. I called a meeting with Donald Hughes and Sharon Lopez at a local coffee shop. I explained everything that had been happening. We cannot do anything officially, Donald said. She is not on the board anymore and this is not HOA business. I know, but I wanted you to be aware. If anything escalates, I will be filing police reports and possibly seeking a restraining order. That is fair, Sharon said. And for what it is worth, I am sorry you are dealing with this. Patricia was always difficult, but I never thought she would take it this far. The harassment continued for another month. Someone filed a complaint with the county about noise from my workshop, claiming I was operating outside permitted hours. This was false. I worked normal business hours, but it required another inspection. Then someone reported that my cargo van was a commercial vehicle parked on residential property in violation of covenant rules. This was also false. Commercial vehicles were allowed as long as they were not semi-trucks or had company advertising. My van was plain white. Finally, in late September, something happened that crossed a legal line. I returned home from delivering a furniture piece to find that someone had spray painted the word illegal in large red letters on the side of my workshop. This was vandalism, a criminal offense. I immediately called the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Mike Harrison arrived within 30 minutes. He photographed the damage, took my statement, and asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. I have suspicions, but no proof, I said. I explained the situation with Patricia Zimmerman, the HOA dispute, and the pattern of harassment. Do you have security cameras? No, but I am going to install them immediately. Good idea. I will file this report, but without evidence pointing to a specific person, there is not much we can do. If it happens again after you have cameras, we will have something to work with. The next day, I had a security company install cameras covering my driveway, the front of my house, and all sides of my workshop. They were motion activated and recorded to cloud storage. I also filed for a protective order against Patricia Zimmerman. I documented every incident of harassment, the timeline of events, and the vandalism. A hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. 4 days after installing the cameras, they caught something. At 2:15 in the morning, a sedan pulled into my driveway with its headlights off. A figure got out, approached my workshop, and used a screwdriver to scratch deep gouges into the cedar siding. The camera footage was clear enough to identify the vehicle make and model. A late model Mercedes E-Class, silver. I called Deputy Harrison immediately. He came out that morning, reviewed the footage, and confirmed what I already knew. That is Patricia Zimmerman's car. I recognize it from responding to calls in her neighborhood. We need to confirm it is her doing the damage, though. We watched the footage on my computer. The figure was wearing dark clothes and a hood, but in one frame, when they turned toward the camera, the streetlight illuminated their face. It was Patricia. I have enough to bring her in for questioning, Deputy Harrison said. This is criminal mischief, and with the prior vandalism incident, we might be looking at a pattern. Patricia was arrested the following day. According to Donald, who heard it from another resident, she was taken from her home in handcuffs while her husband stood in the doorway looking mortified. The charges were 2 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of trespassing. She bonded out quickly, but the damage was done to her reputation. At the protective order hearing, I presented all my evidence: the timeline of harassment, the vandalism, the security footage. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that I had no proof she was behind the earlier incidents, only the one caught on camera. The judge disagreed. Miss Zimmerman, the pattern here is clear. You have engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against Mr. Thompson following a personal dispute. The security footage proves you committed criminal vandalism. I am granting the protective order. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Thompson, his property, and his place of business for a period of 1 year. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Patricia said nothing, but her face was pale. The criminal case proceeded separately. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to the vandalism charges, pay restitution for the damage to my workshop, perform 100 hours of community service, and serve 2 years of probation. She accepted the deal. The restitution check arrived in November. $8,000, covering the cost of repairing the spray paint and the scratch siding, plus the installation of the security system. I used some of it to upgrade my workshop equipment and donated the rest to a local youth woodworking program. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled down after that. Donald Hughes ran for official election as HOA president and won unopposed. He reformed the architectural review process, making it simpler and more transparent. Several other residents with existing outbuildings submitted retroactive applications, all of which were approved without issue. Patricia and her husband quietly listed their house for sale in December. According to Robert, her husband had been humiliated by the whole situation, and they were moving to a different part of Greenville where no one knew about the incident. The house sold in February to a young couple with 2 kids. I met them at a neighborhood welcome party that Donald organized. They seemed nice and had no interest in HOA politics whatsoever. My workshop became a fixture of the neighborhood. Kids riding bikes would sometimes stop to watch me work through the open door. I started teaching basic woodworking classes in the evenings for interested residents, something Donald suggested as a community activity. It turned into a popular program. One Saturday in March, Tom Fletcher stopped by with his grandson. "This is Jake. He is thinking about going to trade school for carpentry. I told him he should see a real workshop." I spent an hour showing Jake around, explaining different tools and techniques. His eyes lit up when I demonstrated the dovetail jig. "This is so much cooler than sitting in an office," Jake said. "It is hard work," I told him, "but if you love it, it does not feel like work." After they left, I stood in my workshop, looking around at the space I had fought so hard to keep. The afternoon sun streamed through the west-facing windows, illuminating sawdust particles floating in the air. My current project, a cherry wood dresser, sat half-finished on the main workbench. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The stress, the legal fees, the harassment, the vandalism. It had been exhausting and frustrating, and there were moments when I considered just tearing the building down to make the problems go away. But I had not. I had stood my ground, fought for what was reasonable and right, and ultimately prevailed. Not just in a legal sense, but in changing how the HOA operated, making it more fair and transparent for everyone. The workshop had become more than just a building where I made furniture. It represented something larger, the principle that homeowner associations should serve their communities, not control them through petty enforcement and arbitrary rules. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and got back to work on the dresser. Outside, I could hear kids playing in someone's yard, a dog barking in the distance, and the normal sounds of a neighborhood going about its weekend. It was peaceful, finally. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another furniture commission inquiry, this time for a custom entertainment center. Business was good and getting better. Word of mouth had spread about the quality of my work, and I had more projects lined up than I could handle alone. I was actually considering hiring an assistant, something I had never imagined possible when I was working out of my cramped garage. I typed a response to the inquiry, setting up a consultation for the following week. As I hit send, I realized something important. Patricia Zimmerman had tried to destroy my workshop and my business out of spite, but she had actually done the opposite. The publicity from the HOA dispute had brought attention to my work. Several of my recent clients had specifically mentioned hearing about the furniture maker who fought the HOA and wanting to support someone who stood up for himself. Adversity had become advertisement. I finished sanding the dresser's top panel and moved to the staining station. This piece was going to be beautiful when completed, with book-matched wood grain and hand-cut joinery that would last generations. Creating something permanent and valuable with my hands never got old. Around 5 in the evening, my wife Emma came out to the workshop. We had been married for 8 years, and she had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire HOA ordeal, even though it had strained our finances and caused considerable stress. "Dinner is almost ready," she said, "but I wanted to tell you something first." "What is up?" "I was talking to Jennifer Martinez today. You know, the family with the big shed that you photographed." "Yeah." "She told me that after watching how you handled the HOA situation, she and her husband are planning to convert their shed into an art studio. She is a painter, but has not had proper space to work. Your whole thing inspired her to actually use the building instead of just storing Christmas decorations in it." I smiled. "That is great." She also said that half the neighborhood thinks you should run for HOA president next year. "Not happening," I said firmly. "I have zero interest in HOA politics." That is what I told her, but it is nice that people appreciate what you did. Emma looked around the workshop, taking in the organized tool storage, the dust collection system, the efficient layout I had designed. "This really is a great space. I am glad you did not let them take it from you." "Me too." After dinner, I returned to the workshop for a couple more hours of work. This was my favorite time to work, when the neighborhood was quiet and I could focus completely on the craft. The radio played classic rock quietly in the background as I applied the second coat of stain to the dresser. My phone rang around 8. It was Marcus Webb, my attorney. "Henry, I wanted to let you know that I received notification today. Patricia Zimmerman's probation officer filed a report that she violated the protective order." My stomach tightened. "How?" "She apparently drove past your house repeatedly last week. A neighbor reported it to police, and it was confirmed by traffic camera footage. She's going to face a probation violation hearing." "What happens to her?" "Potentially jail time, though more likely extended probation and stricter terms. But I wanted you to be aware in case she tries to make contact or escalate things. I still have the security cameras running." "I will be careful." "Good. Call me immediately if anything happens." After hanging up, I felt the old stress returning. I had hoped Patricia was done causing problems, but apparently not. I mentioned it to Emma, who looked worried. "Should we be concerned about our safety?" "I do not think she is violent. She is vindictive and petty, but everything she has done has been property damage and harassment. Still, let us make sure the house is locked at night and the cameras are working." The probation violation hearing happened 2 weeks later. Marcus attended and reported back that Patricia had been found in violation. Her probation was extended by an additional year. She was fitted with a GPS monitoring ankle bracelet, and she was ordered to undergo anger management counseling. Her husband filed for divorce the following month. According to neighborhood gossip, which Robert gleefully reported, Patricia had become increasingly unstable and obsessive after the initial criminal case. Her husband had tried to get her psychological help, but she refused. The protective order violation was the final straw for him. I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing this. Part of me was satisfied that there were consequences for her actions. Part of me felt sorry for her, watching her life fall apart over what had started as an HOA dispute about a workshop. But mostly, I just wanted it to be over. Spring turned to summer. The protective order remained in place, and I had no further incidents. Patricia's house finally sold in June, and she moved to an apartment across town. I only knew this because the new owners, the Hendersons, ironically the same family Patricia had targeted over their door color, mentioned it when I delivered a custom console table they had commissioned. "Good riddance," Mrs. Henderson said. "That woman made our lives miserable before we even knew what we had done wrong. I am sorry you went through that. Honestly, your situation was worse. At least she just sent us nasty letters. She vandalized your property. It worked out in the end. That is a positive way to look at it." The workshop continued to be the center of my professional life. I completed the cherry dresser, the custom entertainment center, and several other significant projects. My assistant, a recent trade school graduate named Kyle, started in July and quickly became invaluable. Teaching him reminded me how much I loved the craft itself, beyond just the business. Watching someone learn to read wood grain, or master a difficult joint, or see their first project come together brought back the excitement I had felt when I first started woodworking. In August, the local newspaper did a feature story on small businesses in Greenville. They included my furniture workshop, with photos of the space and several completed pieces. The article mentioned the HOA dispute briefly, but focused primarily on craftsmanship and the revival of traditional woodworking skills. That article brought in even more business. I started getting inquiries from interior designers in Charleston and Charlotte, expanding my market beyond Greenville. One Friday evening in September, exactly 1 year after the vandalism incident, I was closing up the workshop when Donald Hughes stopped by. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, come in." He looked around appreciatively. "Every time I see this place, I am amazed at what you built. And not just the building itself, but the business you have created. Thank you. What brings you by?" "I wanted to give you an update on the HOA. We just finished our annual audit and membership survey. Participation in HOA activities is up 60% from last year. Satisfaction with board leadership is at 92%, and property values in Meadowbrook Estates have increased more than comparable neighborhoods." "That is great news." "It is. And I wanted you to know that a lot of that came from how we handled your situation. When the membership saw that the board was willing to admit a mistake and fix it, rather than dig in out of pride, it changed how people viewed the HOA. We went from being seen as adversarial to actually being helpful. I am glad something good came from it. More than you know. We have used your case as a template for reforming other HOA policies. We created clear architectural review guidelines with specific timelines and standards. We established an appeals process. We even changed how we communicate with residents, making everything transparent and accessible." He handed me a document. "This is the new Meadowbrook Estates architectural review policy. I had it printed and bound for you. Consider it a thank you." I flipped through it. The policy was clear, reasonable, and included photos of my workshop as an example of an approved auxiliary structure. I do not know what to say. You do not need to say anything. You made our community better by refusing to accept arbitrary treatment. That took courage and it cost you time and money. The least we can do is acknowledge it." After Donald left, I sat in my workshop reading through the new policy. It was comprehensive and fair, exactly what should have existed from the beginning. If this document had been in place 3 years ago, none of the conflict would have happened. I would have submitted my plans, received approval within 30 days, and built my workshop without drama. But I also recognize that sometimes positive change only happens through conflict. If I had quietly accepted Patricia's initial rejection, or agreed to tear down the workshop rather than fight, the HOA would still be operating under vague rules and arbitrary enforcement. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Are you coming in? It is getting late." I looked at the time, 9:30. I had been lost in thought longer than I realized. "Coming now," I texted back. I turned off the lights and locked the workshop door. Walking back to the house, I looked up at the clear September sky, stars visible despite the ambient light from Greenville. The air had that first hint of fall crispness, my favorite time of year. Inside, Emma was watching television in the living room. I sat next to her and told her about Donald's visit and the new HOA policy. "So you are famous," she joked. "The man who fixed the HOA." I would not go that far. No, really. Think about it. How many people live in neighborhoods where they are afraid of their HOA? Afraid to make improvements, afraid to do anything that might attract attention. You fought back, and you won, and now your whole community is better for it. I just wanted to build a workshop. Sometimes that is how change happens. Someone just wants to do a reasonable thing, and the system says no, and that person decides not to accept it. We watched TV for a while, some home renovation show that Emma liked, but my mind kept drifting back to everything that had happened. The next morning, Saturday, I woke early and went for a run through Meadowbrook Estates. It was something I did occasionally, though I was not an avid runner. But I wanted to see the neighborhood, really see it, in light of everything that had transpired. I ran past the Martinez house with their shed that was being converted to an art studio, past the Johnsons' pool house where their teenagers were already swimming despite the early hour, past Tom Fletcher's place where he was out watering his lawn. "Morning, Henry," he called. I waved and kept running. The neighborhood looked the same as it had when I first moved in 3 years ago. Nice homes, well-maintained yards, tree-lined streets, but it felt different now. Or maybe I felt different about it. This was my community, and I had fought to make it fairer and more reasonable. Not just for myself, but for everyone who lived here. When I got back home, Kyle was already at the workshop. We had a commission job that needed to be completed by Monday, a custom dining table for a client's anniversary. "Morning," he said as I entered. "I got the top panel glued up. Just needs to cure for a few hours. Great work. Let us start on the base while that sets." We worked together in comfortable silence, the kind that develops between people who do skilled work side by side. The table base required precise mortise and tenon joinery, and Kyle had been practicing the technique for weeks. "Line it up carefully," I said as he positioned a tenon. "Remember, you cannot undo it once the glue goes in." He nodded, focused completely on the work. The joints slid together perfectly. "That is beautiful," I said. "You are getting really good at this. I have a good teacher." Around noon, Emma brought out sandwiches for us. She stayed and chatted for a while, asking Kyle about his plans for the future. "I want to have my own shop someday," he said. "Like Henry, build custom furniture, maybe teach classes." "That is a good goal," Emma said. "Just make sure you check with your HOA first." We all laughed. After lunch, Robert Chen stopped by with his teenage son, Michael. "Michael needs to do a project for his woodworking class. Can he watch you work for a bit? Maybe get some pointers?" "Of course. Come on in." Michael was quiet but attentive. I showed him the dining table we were building, explaining each step of the process. When I mentioned that proper planning was essential, Kyle pulled out the detailed drawings we had made before starting. "This is the boring part," Kyle told Michael, "but it is the most important. If your plan is wrong, your project will be wrong." "Henry, can I ask you something?" Michael said after a while. "Sure." "My dad told me about what happened with the HOA. How did you know you were right? Like when everyone was saying you were wrong, how did you stay confident?" It was a deeper question than I expected from a 16-year-old. "I guess because I had done my homework," I said. "I knew my workshop was built correctly with proper permits. I knew it was not hurting anyone. And when I looked at the HOA rules carefully, I could see that what they were claiming did not actually match what the rules said. So it was not about confidence exactly. It was about knowing the facts and standing on them. But it must have been scary with the lawsuit and everything." It was. And expensive and stressful. There were times I thought about just giving up because fighting was too hard. "Why did you not?" "Because I knew if I did, I would regret it forever. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is difficult." Michael nodded thoughtfully. After Robert and Michael left, Kyle said, "That was a good answer. The stuff about standing on facts. Did you think I was going to say something inspirational about courage? Maybe. But what you actually said was better. Facts matter more than feelings." "Not always, but in a legal dispute, absolutely." We finished the table base by late afternoon. It would need to dry overnight, then we could attach the top panel on Sunday and apply finish on Monday morning. I spent Sunday with Emma, taking a break from the workshop. We drove up to the Blue Ridge Mountains for a day hike, something we had not done in months. The fall colors were just starting, hints of red and gold among the green. Standing at an overlook, looking across miles of forested mountains, Emma said, "You seem more relaxed than you have in a year." I feel more relaxed, like a weight has been lifted, because Patricia is gone, partly, but also because everything with the workshop is finally resolved. No more legal uncertainty, no more wondering if someone is going to show up and cause problems. You can just work. Exactly. We hiked for another hour, then found a small mountain town with a cafe where we had lunch. The server was friendly, the food was good, and we talked about simple things. Plans for the house, whether we should adopt a dog, where we might vacation next year. Normal life things, not crisis management. When we got home that evening, I checked on the workshop. Everything looked good. The table base joints were solid and we would be able to finish the project on schedule. Monday morning, Kyle and I attached the table top and began applying finish. This was a Danish oil finish, which required multiple coats but brought out the natural beauty of the walnut wood. "This is going to be stunning," Kyle said, wiping on the first coat. "The client is going to love it." And they did. When I delivered the table Tuesday afternoon, the couple nearly cried looking at it. It was for their 35th anniversary, and they had chosen walnut because that was a traditional 35th anniversary wood. "This is better than we imagined," the wife said, running her hand across the smooth surface. They paid the balance, gave me a generous tip, and asked for my card to pass along to friends. Driving home, I felt the satisfaction that came from doing work I was proud of and having it genuinely appreciated. The rest of the fall passed peacefully. I completed projects, took on new commissions, and continued teaching evening woodworking classes in the workshop. The classes had become popular enough that I was considering setting up a formal curriculum, and maybe even charging a small fee to cover materials. In November, I received an unexpected phone call from a producer at a home improvement network show. They were doing a series on home workshops and wanted to feature mine. "We heard about your situation with the HOA," the producer explained, "and we love the story of someone fighting for their right to have a creative workspace. Plus, your workshop is really well designed. We think our viewers would be inspired by it." "I am not sure I want to be on TV," I said honestly. "No pressure. Think about it. We could shoot it all in one day, minimal intrusion, and it would be great publicity for your furniture business." I discussed it with Emma that evening. "What do you think?" "I think you have spent a year dealing with the consequences of building this workshop. You might as well get something positive out of it." "That is surprisingly practical. I have my moments." I called the producer back and agreed. They scheduled filming for early December. The shoot was more involved than I expected, but also kind of fun. The producer wanted me to talk about how I designed the space, my favorite tools, and yes, the HOA situation. But they framed it positively, focusing on perseverance and community resolution rather than dwelling on the conflict. Kyle appeared in some shots, working on a project while I explained teaching techniques. He was nervous at first but relaxed once he got used to the cameras. The episode was scheduled to air in February. In the meantime, the holidays arrived. Meadowbrook Estates had a Christmas lights competition that year, organized by Donald as a community building event. I was not particularly into elaborate light displays, but Emma convinced me to at least put up some basic decorations. The neighborhood looked beautiful, all lit up. Even Patricia's old house, now owned by the Hendersons, had a tasteful display. On Christmas Eve, several neighbors gathered at Tom Fletcher's house for hot chocolate and caroling. It was the kind of old-fashioned community event that rarely happens anymore. Standing around singing with people I had once feared might side against me in the HOA dispute felt redemptive. The new year arrived quietly. I spent New Year's Day in the workshop, alone, working on a personal project, a jewelry box for Emma's birthday in February. It was made from bird's eye maple with hand-cut dovetails and a hidden compartment. The kind of project I did because I loved the craft, not for money. As I worked, I reflected on the previous year. It had been one of the most challenging and stressful years of my life, but also one of the most meaningful. I had learned about standing up for myself, about community, about resilience. And I had this workshop, this space where I created things of beauty and value, where I taught others, where I found satisfaction in daily work. The HOA dispute had been terrible while it was happening, but it had forced me to engage with my community in ways I otherwise would not have. I knew my neighbors now. I was part of something larger than myself. In February, the home improvement show episode aired. Emma and I watched it together, and I was pleasantly surprised. They had edited it well, making me seem articulate and thoughtful rather than just stubborn. The response was immediate. My website traffic spiked. I received dozens of emails from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for standing up to unfair rules. Several were serious commission inquiries. One email stood out. It was from a law professor at the University of South Carolina who taught a course on property law and HOA governance. Mr. Thompson, I would like to use your case as an example in my class, if you would be willing to come speak to my students about your experience. HOA disputes are becoming increasingly common, and your situation illustrates important principles about covenant interpretation, selective enforcement, and homeowner rights. I agreed. Speaking to a class of law students was intimidating, but also kind of cool. The speaking engagement happened in March. I drove to Columbia and spent 90 minutes talking to about 40 law students about the entire timeline of events, the legal strategies Marcus had used, and the ultimate resolution. During the question period, one student asked, "Do you think HOAs serve a legitimate purpose, or should they be abolished?" "They serve a legitimate purpose," I said. They maintain common areas, organize community activities, and can genuinely protect property values by preventing truly problematic situations. The issue is not HOAs themselves, but how they are run. When board members care more about power and control than actually serving the community, that is when you get situations like mine. Another student asked, "If you could go back and do it differently, would you submit the architectural review application before building?" Honestly, yes. Even though I think the requirement was poorly communicated and the process was unclear, it was in the covenants. I should have done my homework better. But that does not excuse the HOA's response to my oversight. A reasonable board would have said, "You should have submitted this first, but the building is fine, so let us do the paperwork retroactively." Instead, they tried to use it as an excuse to force me to tear down a perfectly good building. The professor thanked me after class. "That was excellent. You gave these students a real-world perspective they would not get from just reading case law." Driving home, I felt satisfied with how I had represented myself and the lessons from my experience. Spring arrived, and with it, the 1-year expiration of Patricia's protective order. I had not heard anything about her in months and assumed she had moved on with her life. But one Saturday in April, I saw her. I was at a home improvement store buying lumber when I noticed a woman in the next aisle. She looked rough, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled. But I recognized her immediately. Patricia Zimmerman. She saw me at the same moment. Her eyes widened and she quickly turned and walked away. I stood there holding a piece of oak, feeling an unexpected wave of sadness. Whatever she had been before our conflict, whatever she had become during it, she was now clearly a person whose life had fallen apart. I did not feel triumph. I felt regret that things had escalated so far, even though I knew I had not been the one to escalate them. That evening I mentioned the encounter to Emma. "You think she is okay?" Emma asked. "I do not know. She did not look okay. It is not your responsibility. I know, but still." "Henry, you tried to resolve things reasonably. She chose to vandalize your property and harass you. There were consequences for that. You did not create those consequences, she did." Emma was right, but I still felt unsettled. A week later, I learned through Robert that Patricia had been arrested again, this time for shoplifting. Apparently, her finances had collapsed after the divorce, and she had been caught stealing groceries from a supermarket. "She is taking a plea deal," Robert said. "Probably probation and restitution. But man, what a fall from grace." I thought about the woman who had stood so imperiously at that first HOA meeting, announcing my workshop was illegal with such confidence and authority. And now, she was being arrested for stealing food. Life came at you fast sometimes. But I also knew that her choices had led to her consequences. I had tried to be reasonable. She had chosen vindictiveness and ultimately criminality. You cannot save people from themselves. Summer arrived, my second full summer with the workshop operational. Kyle had developed enough skill that he could handle some projects independently, which freed me up to take on more custom design work and teaching. The evening woodworking classes expanded. I now had a waiting list of people wanting to learn basic furniture making. Donald suggested I apply for a grant from the Greenville County Arts Council to formalize the program. "You are providing a community service," he said. "Teaching traditional skills, creating opportunities for people to learn craftsmanship." That is exactly what these arts grants are meant to support. I applied, not expecting much. But in August, I received a notification that I had been awarded $5,000 to develop a formal woodworking education program. The money allowed me to buy additional tools specifically for teaching, upgrade the safety equipment, and create structured lesson plans. By September, I had launched Meadowbrook Woodworks Academy, offering 8-week courses in basic furniture making. The first class had 12 students, ranging from teenagers to retirees. Teaching people to transform raw lumber into functional furniture was incredibly rewarding. One evening in October, as I was cleaning up after class, Tom Fletcher approached me. His grandson Jake was now enrolled and showing real talent. "Henry, I want you to know that what you did, standing up to Patricia and the HOA, that changed things around here for the better. People are not afraid anymore to actually use their properties for what they want." That art studio the Martinez family created. They are hosting community painting classes now. The Johnsons are talking about converting their pool house to a recording studio for their son's music. People feel free to do things now. That is great to hear. It is more than great. It is what a neighborhood should be. People living their lives, pursuing their interests, supporting each other, not living in fear of violation notices. As Tom left, I reflected on his words. I had never intended to change my community's culture. I had just wanted to build a workshop to grow my furniture business. But sometimes individual actions have ripple effects far beyond their original intent. The protective order against Patricia finally expired in November. I thought about her occasionally, wondering how she was doing, but I never saw her again. According to the neighborhood grapevine, she had moved to another state to live with family and start over. I hope she found peace. Despite everything she had put me through, I did not wish her harm. As Thanksgiving approached, Emma and I hosted a dinner at our house for some of the neighbors. Robert and his family came, along with Tom and his wife, the Martinez family, and a few others. It was crowded and chaotic and wonderful. After dinner, Several people wanted tours of the workshop. I showed them current projects, explained the teaching program, and talked about my business growth. "You should be proud of what you have built here," Robert said, "and I do not just mean the building itself." "I am," I replied. "It has been a journey, but worth it." Christmas came around again. The neighborhood lights competition had become an annual tradition. I still did not go crazy with decorations, but I enjoyed driving around looking at everyone else's displays. On Christmas morning, Emma gave me a gift, a custom sign for the workshop that read "Henry Thompson Fine Furniture" with hand-carved lettering. She had commissioned it from another local craftsperson. "I figured it was time your workshop had a proper sign," she said. I hung it above the door that afternoon. Looking at it, I thought about how far I had come from that first threatening letter from Patricia 2 years earlier. The workshop was no longer controversial. It was now a recognized part of the neighborhood, contributing to the community through teaching and craftsmanship. That was the victory. Not winning the legal battle, though that mattered, but transforming something that had been called illegal and problematic into something positive and valued. As the year drew to a close, I took inventory of where things stood. My furniture business was thriving, with a 6-month backlog of commissioned work. Kyle had developed into an excellent craftsman and was considering eventually opening his own shop. The teaching program had a waiting list and was expanding to include advanced courses. The HOA remained stable and reasonable under Donald's continued leadership. The architectural review process worked smoothly. Neighborhood participation in community events was high. Property values continued to increase. And my workshop, the building that had started all this drama and conflict, stood solid and productive behind my house, exactly where it belonged. On New Year's Eve, I stood in the workshop alone, running my hand along the workbench I had built when the space first opened. So much had happened at this bench. So many projects completed, so many students taught, so many hours of satisfying work. The building was just wood and metal and electrical wiring. But it represented something more: the right to use your property reasonably, the importance of standing up to arbitrary authority, the value of community over control. I turned off the lights and locked the door, heading back to the house where Emma was waiting to watch the ball drop. Tomorrow would start another year. More furniture to build, more students to teach, more ordinary days of work and life in Meadowbrook Estates. And I could not wait.